Per 9000's Game Room.
Okay, so the game I'm reviewing here is Castlevania 4, as you'll know because you clicked on the link. Konami has existed since 1969, but originally it was a jukebox rental and repair business in Osaka, Japan. In 1973 they began working on manufacturing amusement machines for arcades. Their first actual game machines were not created until 1978 though, and these games were called Block Game, Block Invader, Spaceship, Space King, and I have to admit to never having played a single one of them. However, I have heard that Space King was a Space Invaders rip-off. Konami's real success as far as games go began in the year of my birth, 1981, with games including Amador, Frogger and Scramble, all of which I have played, enjoyed and owned at some point on at least one system. In fact, I was playing Frogger with my father on the Atari 2600 just a few years after this, when I was a very small boy. Konami made approximately 50 games for the Super Famicom, or as we know it, the Super Nintendo, and over here in Europe we probably got about 30 of them. But I want to talk about one of the games they brought out in the first years of producing Super Nintendo games, which is of course Castlevania 4. The game was very important, not just then but now as well, largely because it comes from a series that started before the SNES and still exists to this day. And I would argue that although it has been a while since there has been a truly great Castlevania game, the series itself is still very popular. I watched all 3 seasons of it on Netflix, and I would highly recommend that to fans of the games or just fans of good anime in general. Now, as a child, when I was young, a lot of these SNES magazines would have not only reviews in them, but they'd also have a bit near the back which was like a huge list of games with quick one-line reviews and a score. In the world we live in nowadays, with a lot of people accusing magazines and websites of taking bribes and there being a lack of faith in some reviewers, people might wonder why I even cared about these lists. But as a child with limited income and a lack of internet at the time, I'd remove these pages from the magazines and fold them up and put them in the back pocket of my jeans, and I'd take them with me just in case I saw a cheap game on a market or in a pawn store or on sale in a shop. But I've always liked these pages of review scores, and it was recently, before sitting down to write this review, that I sat flipping through a list of PlayStation scores from an old PS1 magazine, and I found myself actually calling bullshit on some of the scores. That's when I saw one review and I had to call mega bullshit on, and that was their review for Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and they'd given it 7 out of 10. Now to me, Castlevania Symphony of the Night was one of the very best games that I ever played on the PlayStation 1, and what is more, it's a game that I still hold in massive regard to this day. I have completed it on the PSP, and I've completed it on the Xbox 360, and I've emulated it. How does this relate to the SNES, you might ask? Well, it's simple. I've always loved Castlevania, and when I first played Super Castlevania 4, I would have bet money on the fact that this was the pinnacle of the series, that this was the best Castlevania there ever had been and there ever would be, and that things would just never get any better than this. So, clearly young me absolutely loved Castlevania, and absolutely loved Castlevania 4. But what about now? Okay, well, let's give you a little information. Castlevania 4 came out in 1991, and it is considered an action platformer, and is also largely considered to be a remake of the original Castlevania on the NES. A remake that adds on extra features, ups the power and gets rid of some problems. It was developed and published by Konami and is the first Castlevania game for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It was re-released on the Wii Virtual Console in 2006 and also found its way onto the Wii U Virtual Console in 2013. So it's clearly had an audience at least several times. It features improved graphics in general plus very cool use of the Super Nintendo's Mode 7. The game also features a brilliant soundtrack which mixes brand new tunes in with remixed and improved versions of some of the classic NES music. The game takes place in the year 1691 in Transylvania. You play as vampire hunter Simon Belmont, with your quest being simple: find and destroy Count Dracula. Now, the graphics might look quite simple nowadays, and on first impression some of the graphics are a little basic and functional, but then there are extra special moments where the whole screen will turn and pivot, when you will really get to see and appreciate all of the effort that went into the game. The soundtrack though I don't feel has aged at all. Sure, we now live in a world where full on CD quality real songs exist in games, but when I have this game in my slot and I'm playing, I never once stop and think this could be better. I simply think this music is kick-ass and fits in so well with everything. The game is reasonably challenging. Sure, it's not as hard as the NES versions, but a lot of the challenging then came from either cryptic guesswork, control issues, and deaths which felt unjust. None of this is present in this game. When you die in this one, it never feels like you've been cheated or that you've drawn the short straw. You instead simply feel like you need to try harder. This game polished up everything that was Castlevania, and I cannot see how the game could remain the same and get any better than this. For a long time it felt like this would be the pinnacle of the series, as I've said, and when the N64 versions came out and the 3D aspect of the games was added, and the control issues that this brought with them, and an increase in confusion and a disconnect between skill and achievement, for me the games really took a step backwards. It wasn't until the PlayStation 1 Castlevania came about and bits of Metroid and RPG stats were grafted onto the game that I felt the series began to move forward again. But for raw platforming action, you can't do much better than Castlevania 4. I would give this game a very strong 8 out of 10. In fact, let's call it an 8.5. And this is taking how it has aged into account. Back in the day, I probably would have given it a solid 10 out of 10. But I've tasted the Metroidvania style, newer flavours since then. And in comparison, this is great, but I just don't think it's as great. This is a game which both English and American cartridge-only copies easily sell for around the £40 price point. One fair thing to point out though is that this game has no battery backup. Continuing is all password based, so that's one thing you don't need to worry about when trying to buy one. Okay, all I can say once again, try Castlevania 4 if you haven't. It's an excellent game. That's Kerr9000 signing off, saying keep on gaming.